All right. Welcome to everyone who's tuning in and watching the recording of this, the 11th consecutive Collective Intelligence Block Party. I'm Jamin Shively, main host here at the Block Party, and great to have everyone here. We've got a lot of exciting topics that we're going to be covering today, and perhaps the two biggies are collective intelligence itself, and then simultaneously eradicating hunger and pandemics through redesigning, reconfiguring the entire food supply chain and delivering food directly to people's homes as a massive effort. And there's so many different facets to that. One of the facets is that by bringing food security to the world, we unite ourselves in a much bigger way, right? Like, just imagine a scenario where you're like a little kid and you go over to a friend's house or something because you want to play, and imagine that they're like, well, he's busy eating dinner, why don't you wait? So you're waiting on the front porch or in the living room or wherever, and meanwhile the family is all eating, but you're not eating, right? Just picture that scenario for a second. Everyone else is eating except for you. Then imagine a different scenario where you come and knock on your friend's house, the front door, and they say, hey, oh, well, he's eating dinner, why don't you come join us? Yeah, come on, right? No, I've already eaten. Doesn't matter. Come join us anyway. Have some dessert. Have some whatever you want, right? So the very fact of being included in eating, in sharing food, I believe is the single biggest means for bringing humanity together. And until we get together, we're going to have the world that we've got, a fragmented world, divided, divisive, tribalism, class warfare, race warfare, tribe warfare, everything. We're at war with ourselves. We're at war with each other. And I think that by guaranteeing that everyone gets to eat, it just completely changes the tone of this whole camping trip on planet Earth that we're here for, right? So for me, that's the single biggest, is that it brings us together. But then in very practical terms, beyond just the spiritual and sociological coming together and unification of humanity, we also have the very practical of that we prevent the world from slipping and sliding into a modality of Mad Max, where there's just chaos and plundering and hoarding and fighting, and myriad other benefits. So anyway, we'll talk lots about this over the course of today, and very intensively, starting at 11 a.m. Pacific. But even on the current schedule, even though the website hasn't been updated yet, because I got the schedule done too late last night to get it to Null in time before he got to bed. But anyway, whenever he wakes up, he'll update it. I emailed it out last night. But according to the current schedule, we're supposed to be talking about this right now. Not that we have to stick to that. We did invite some, the whole helpful engineering community, and hopefully they'll be showing up at different times. But anyway, Miles, you've got your hand up. Go for it, Miles.
Yeah, so this is fantastic. It's a horrible situation we find ourselves in, and not to take away from the immensity of the tragedy for this Dos Equis is causing. However, it's presenting us with this opportunity that you've described, an amazing opportunity for us to leverage because it's identifying that, what's important to us, what do we need to value on the planet, rearrange those values, reevaluate those values. And food, as you said, is critical. And the right kind of food, it's steering us to identify the right kind of food, which is not meat and dairy. So that's a very positive thing. I was on a webinar as a attendee for the Calgary Climate Change Hub. And Dr. Joe Vipond, who I interviewed down in front of City Hall, if you remember, on a previous block party, he's the president or the chair of the Calgary Climate Hub. He is also the president of the Canadian Association for Physicians for the Environment. Strangely, though, and I'm not critiquing or going to criticize people. Everybody has their priorities, I suppose. But in the webinar, he presented his priorities. And these are, number one, green buildings, LEED type engineered buildings. Number two, directing stimulus money to the most appropriate destinations. And then electricity control by the citizens, the public utility, electricity utility. So anyway, I'm just observing that diet and nutrition and the source of zoonotic disease is not part of those three. However, he made the point, when it comes to creating a campaign, he gave some great tips on 7 tips for operating a campaign. And he's pointed out that any project or initiative that you're going to target has to be something that you have a reasonable expectation of doing. And what you've talked about, Jamin, is a reasonable target. It's pretty straightforward, as you've just alluded. People need food. Let's redirect the food that's being put into the dump because of the supply chain issues and get it to the hungry people so that they're not getting desperate. So that's an excellent, achievable goal. He said, he pointed out, now some people may have other targets that they would think is worthwhile pursuing. So, and he said, so for example, people might think that it'd be a great idea to shut down the airline industry because of the amount of fuel they burn and the amount of CO2 that they put into the atmosphere. And he said, well, that would be an enormously unrealistic target, to think that you're going to convince people to shut down the airline industry. But this is what the Dos Equis beer crisis has done. In almost overnight, there are tens of thousands of multi-million, $100 million aircraft grounded. The airports are full, chock full as parking lots for these aircraft. This little invisible virus did overnight what some people would have thought would be a good idea. Now, I'm saying some people because I don't know that necessarily that is what we'd want, but some people would probably say, yeah, this is shut down the airline industry. So anyway, in summary, what I'm getting at is this virus is doing incredible, it's an incredible force to redirect our thinking if we wake up to it, what it's telling us, what it's trying to tell us. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Yep, absolutely transforming everything. And among those things is the fact that the economy is tremendously contracting. And so people don't have the means to make money anymore like they used to. And so this is leading us to a Mad Max scenario if we don't completely rethink it and redesign it holistically. And it's just, it's so obvious. Feed the people, right? If you're the Russian Tsar and you don't want to get beheaded, feed the people. Otherwise, you know, the Russian Revolution has lessons for us.
And the French.
And the French Revolution. Thank you, Melissa. Emery has his hand up. First, let me read from Dot. Dot says, Miles, speaking of green buildings, and puts a link about algae architecture. Oh my goodness. All right. Emery, go for it.
Thanks, John. I wanted to ask you something. If you could possibly shed some light on how we are to understand what this oil price at being zero, below zero, actually means, and how it translates into our reality. I'd like to be educated on that a little bit. Can you talk about it for a bit?
Yeah, happy to. In terms of the price of oil going negative, I think that's in certain markets. And basically the situation is that, you know, demand for oil has just fallen off a cliff. And so, but if you think about it from like a pipeline standpoint, you've got certain oil projects that are just producing crude, right? They can't really be shut down that easily. And so when the demand has plummeted and your supply from a particular well, for instance, is constant, what do? Well, they, you know, some of these oil producers really have a problem because they can't just turn off the well. It's producing under pressure or under whatever conditions make it so that you can't really stop it. And so you've got a glut. You got all this oil getting dumped on the market that has no place to go. And so that's what causes some producers to say, listen, what do I need to do? Give you the oil for free, but please take it off my hands because I don't have any place to store it. And I can't just go dump it on my neighbor's cornfield over here, or I'll get, you know, sued to the ends of the earth. And that's what brings them to a temporary situation anywhere where they say, listen, if I have to pay you to take this oil off my hands, can I do that? And that's what gets us to a situation where you have temporarily negative oil prices in certain places, certain markets. That's my understanding of it, and that's just me piecing together the pieces. Since I haven't read anything about it, I've just heard, and therefore put the pieces together in my own mind. But that's what I think about it. And let's see. Emery, go for it.
Yeah, it's pretty strange, you know. It's unimaginable, you know, the concept of it being zero, you know, and I don't know how that breaks down as far as you know, those powers that be. You know, normally we divide them into two categories: the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. Now, my understanding is that the Rothschilds are more, you know, United States side, you know, and the Rothschilds are more the European end of things, and the Rothschilds are more based on the oil. That's their main focus, and Rothschilds everything else. You know, both use a lot of the same techniques, the way they operate and everything. But you know, this oil thing really must hit home here in you know, in our neck of the woods. But you know, price of gas is down real low, I mean, it's good for the consumer, you know, get around a lot cheaper. And if those food supply chains are at work and the truckers are moving along the highways, it's surely cheaper for them too. So, you know, I don't
Hey,
know.
Emery.
Yeah.
So, what Jamin said is my understanding too, and essentially all the tanks, all the big storage tanks, are pretty much full. Yet you still have huge tankers coming across the ocean that set sail, several weeks ago, perhaps. They got loaded weeks ago. And there's a contract that they are fulfilling to bring the oil to Long Beach or New Brunswick there. I think the Irving brothers have a big refinery, and then, other ports around North America. And if there's no place to put it, it's like people are like panicking. I do understand, I believe, that with a lot of oil wells, I think I heard once where if you shut it off, you might actually kill the well because it has to keep flowing to keep producing over time. And, if you just turn it off, it'll like choke it off and you'll have to have a real hard time starting it again. So yeah, there's just this stuff is coming out of the pipes and out of the ground, and they just don't know where to stuff it. The other thing really interesting, to reevaluate this situation of coal, and oil and gas, which Michael Moore's new video or documentary, which I highly recommend people view, is called Planet of the Humans. And he's basically blowing the lid off the fallacy that solar panels, windmills, biomass fuel, batteries, electric cars, that is in any way going to improve the situation. So the documentary by Michael Moore, Planet of the Humans, to me is a huge bolster or reinforcement of what Dr. Sailesh Rao is saying has to be our top priority. And that is changing our diet so that we stop mowing down forests to create food for cows and pigs and or grazing land. And we reforest, and we would use fuel, oil, gas, and coal in a responsible manner to see that as done. So anyway, a few points.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great, Miles. Jamin and I watched that film on Earth Day because he screened it for free on YouTube. It's definitely worth watching. And it's so interesting how many officials and politicians and conservation organizations have sold out to the devil, basically, to money, including the Sierra Club and other groups that were mentioned in his film. I just think it's so ironic that so many things, like you were mentioning about the oil fields, if you stop pumping, they'll choke out. How ironic is that? It's just sort of, we're in this situation of these blessings in disguise, I think, even though it's going to bring us through a really rocky period. But I don't know about you guys, but personally, I am totally willing to give up all my habits, like driving a car, taking airplanes, to save this planet. I mean, I know that's going to be hard, but there are other ways to get around. We can restrict the distances we travel. There's so many things that we can let go of in order to help this Mother Earth of ours. And it's worth it. I mean, none of us have had a haircut in months. You know, there are all these things you don't care about. Like, I didn't brush my hair this morning. You know, we're getting wild again. So we eat breakfast now.
Okay.
Off camera.
Yeah, I mean, the big picture as I look at it is the history of the last 10,000 years has been a history of amping up and amping up and amping up and accelerating, right? Yeah, there have been some bumps in the road here and there, economic recessions and pandemics and whatnot, but the general trend is continuing upward, upward, upward. More people, more production, more energy, more, nature being destroyed to be replaced with monocrop agriculture, whether plant or animal or whatever. And now that we're crashing, right, and contracting, none of the old rules apply like they used to. And other than like the laws of physics, but anything like in terms of economic laws or models or anything like that, kind of out the window. And so, as Dylan was saying, since this is shaking everything up, it's a perfect opportunity to really holistically redesign everything. And
Totally.
I think as far as we humans are concerned, the most profound thing we can redesign is our food systems, and also the very mode of production and distribution of the economy, which up until now has been market-based, based on a game of hoarding. I have to sneeze 1 second. All right. And I think we need a whole new modality, which I think is yet to be invented. As I don't think, communism or socialism, while many of those systems were built on with good intentions and good foundations, their implementations got really screwed up. But I think we need something that looks a lot more like socialism or even communism than a market-based, money-based system of hoarding. Emery's got a really interesting point there. Set the oil ablaze like they did back during with the war with Iraq. The planet needs the damn dimming. And then Emery writes, "I can't believe I said that."
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, Red Adair. He stopped those oil spouts by setting them ablaze. That's right. I don't know if he's still alive to do it. He's the only guy that could do it.
I don't think he's the only one who can do it. He's
just kidding.
With a name like Red Adair.
Isn't that great?
Everyone's like, who's all right.
So is it the divine feminine in half an hour?
Sorry, Miles, is it when?
When's the divine feminine start?
In an hour and a half. Hour and a half.
Hour and a half. Okay.
9 a.m. Pacific. It'll go from 9 to 11, and then at 11 it'll be Silas and Dr. Priya and John Raymer and all of us. So food and reconfiguring and redesigning our food networks. And of course, to make that happen, we need collective superintelligence. But we don't just need to make that happen. We need to make the reconfiguration of food happen, and the cooling of the planet, and the cleaning up of the oceans and deacidification of the oceans, and a deep radical transformation of our economics, politics, our entire set of living arrangements. Look, we're going to be changing what we eat. We're also going to need to be changing where we live, how we live, what we do, and fundamentally, what is the game, right? You know, up until this point of whole system breakdown and collapse, there was a game which, for lack of a better word, sustained us. And it was this game of money and this global economic system that was just based on growth, 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 until what? Well, until a moment like this of whole system breakdown and collapse. It's like, yeah, keep accelerating the car until you crash or run out of gas. Well, in our case, we're crashing. You know, it was predicted 20 years ago we might run out of gas, whatever. Well, that didn't happen thanks to fracking and other creative sources of oil. So we're crashing. So what do you do?
Talking about food,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so as I said at the outset before the recording started, whenever I suggest I might be vegan, my family gives me the gears because, yeah, there's occasions where baking, you know, I'll have some baking. And of course, there was eggs and possibly dairy in it. Although I do have a vegan bread that I like to get when I can, but it's not always available. So anyway, you know, yeah, am I a vegan? No, not 100%, almost. But as my wife says, you can't be almost pregnant. All right, okay. So anyway, so one of the things she's told me she expects of me is to walk the talk more than I have been, and to that end, start growing some of our own food. So she said, you need to go and get seeds, and you need to figure out how you're going to plant some, you know, lettuce, peas, carrots, and such. And it's like, okay, I don't know really what I'm doing, because I haven't gardened in 25 years. But so I was thinking, all right, I'll have to go to Home Depot or another hardware store and buy timber or, you know, lumber and get some screws and build some planter boxes and such. But then when we were in Costco, they had these raised planter bins. And this is one right here. It cost $99 Canadian. Sorry, I think my big finger's in the way. Now, it's raised and it's got special drainage. It is very easy to assemble, and it's plastic. And indeed, these things, I would imagine, are made of recycled plastic, or they certainly could be. So to think that these billions of plastic bottles could possibly be converted into these raised planter bins that people could have in their homes or on their patios and such would utilize waste plastic plus provide us with more food security. So there's a little plug for Costco. I know some people don't like Costco because of their large sales of meat. However, that's one good product, I would say. Anyway, I think it's a good product. I haven't used it yet, so I'll keep you posted as the season progresses.
All righty. Awesome, Miles. Well, thank you for those. Welcome for those who've just joined us. Feel free to chime in and say hello if you'd like. There's never any pressure to talk here on the Block Party, so talking is always optional. Having said that, it is very much encouraged. That's kind of the point. So feel free to chime in if you'd like to say hello, introduce yourself. We're talking about kind of two big topics today. One is collective intelligence, and the other is redesigning, I was going to say redesigning our food networks, but that's really just the beginning. What that's really a part of is a holistic redesign of, frankly, how we walk the earth. What do we eat? How do we get that food? How do we distribute it? Who gets to eat? Who doesn't get to eat? And that is in the realm of economics, politics, really our entire set of living arrangements. So I believe all of that beckons and urgently needs to be holistically redesigned, but starting with the food networks, because that's really where that's the basis of any civilization, are its food networks. And if we're in the business of holistic redesign of anything, be it just our food networks or our entire set of living arrangements, we need collective intelligence. We need collective intelligence to figure out the new design from a standpoint of logistics. And we need to then figure out all the other pieces that will empower and enable those logistics to happen in an optimal way, right? Whether that's figuring out funding mechanisms, or whether it's a matter of removing funding from the equation altogether and, having a more, for lack of a better word, command economy, right? This is the plan, and we simply got to do it, regardless of whether there's money or not, right? Lubricating the system, right? So I really think we're at a moment where all this needs to be reevaluated. See, the money system, I believe, is, if anything, perhaps more of a hindrance than a help in this situation. I think it could be redirected to help, but in its current configuration, if you don't have money, you don't get to eat. I'm kind of stating the obvious here. There are exceptions in the form of charities and whatnot. Going back a few decades, President George H.W. Bush talked about 1,000 points of light. Let the charities take care of it. But aside from those exceptions, the fundamental game that we're playing here on Earth is a game of accumulation, and money is the medium of accumulation. And when you have half the population unable to make money, how are they going to eat? Right? So that brings me to the topic of a more deep, radical redesign, where we're not necessarily shackled by the constraints of a global market-based, money-based system. All righty. And James posted a link. Did you want us to take a look at that, James? Or you want to give us some reference around that?
Give me 2 minutes there, Jim, and I'm actually talking to someone there. I'll have to go.
Oh, take your time, James. Take your time.
No bother.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you think about it from a whole system perspective, right? In the face of massive economic contraction / collapse, right? Let's just think about, just imagine planet Earth and all of humanity as like a massive ant colony, for instance. See, when you look at the functioning of an ant colony, it just works as one giant machine. And there's no like money being changed hands between one ant and another as it brings, pieces of chopped up leaf, for example, back to the central hive, right, where it gets processed and digested and turned into edible food for the ants. There's no money being exchanged, as pieces of leaf get to the hive. There's no money lubricating that. So how does it work? Well, it works by a system of agreements, which are encoded in the DNA of the ants. So that's convenient, right? But the broader point, the broader lesson from that is that a vast, complex machine can operate just fine without money. If the ants can do it, certainly we can do it. Or is an individual ant smarter than an individual human? Last time I checked, we've got many orders of magnitude more neurons than an individual ant.
Ants are smarter than humans.
Well, Melissa says that ants are smarter than humans.
I'm not destroying the planet.
Here, can I ask you to speak up? I just want everyone to hear you, so I don't have to.
I said ants are smarter than humans. They're not destroying the planet. They're taking care of our mess. They clean up after us.
Yeah. So can we become as smart as ants, or even smarter? Right? Anyway, I think y'all get my point there. Really, I see a coevolution between collective intelligence, the evolution of collective intelligence, and the reconfiguring of our food systems. So here's how I see kind of this dialectic going. We need collective intelligence to redesign our food systems. And we need redesigned food systems that work to power the collective intelligence, to provide food to the people so that they can think and talk like we're doing here. I need to sneeze again. I think I better find a sweater. But okay, thanks for that.
What, your blue one, Bob?
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so the link James provided is from, thanks, sweetheart, is from Stuart Scott. No, I don't need that. That's fine. But thanks. A link for a video from Stuart Scott. So why don't we take a look at that? That sounds like a good.
Well worth listening to. And apologies there, Jim. And I was just having some messages and food delivered to the door there.
No,
that is definitely well worth watching. He's talking to another Irishman there now who works with the UN, and you know, it's quite incisive, insightful.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's take a look. At least get a start on it and get a feel for it. I'll screen share here in a moment. Let me just, that's the stream. What's happening? All right, screen sharing the video. Stuart Scott.
The world seems to be putting us in a situation that says, well, here's this ingenious thing I came up with. It's going to stop you flying, growing, and globalizing. One of the bedrocks of our understanding of the way the globalized world works, the free movement of people, I don't see that coming back. And I effectively don't see it coming back ever. Will all the people go back to the Irish bars, you know, squashed up against one another in these wonderful, happy, sweaty places, drinking pints of Guinness and listening to rebel songs? Will they? Will businessmen jump on a flight, you know, to Wuhan to try and sell some more BMWs to the Chinese billionaires? Will that happen? What does this mean for world trade? And the thing that strikes me is that this doesn't need any human intervention or any ingenuity or any plan. This is simply how it's going to unfold. People are going to find themselves restricted, localized, changed.
I'm speaking today with John Doyle, my good friend from Brussels, originally from Ireland. And John, I like to say that you work with the EU Commission in Brussels. You work for them for 20 years, yeah, or more.
Mm-hmm.
You're a lifer.
Yeah.
And but the opinions that you express and the statements that you make are your own, and they don't represent official opinions of the EU.
Correct. And in fact, it's one of the great things about the EU and the European Commission as well, that it's also primarily probably a generator of ideas. Its primary and first function is to come up with ideas, to take initiative for the benefit of European citizens, which is, both a joy and a privilege and a responsibility. But it's actually the thing that makes the European Union unique. I'm probably particularly lucky in that I work a lot on foresight, which gives us the chance to work outside normal strictures. But yeah, as I say, I'm proud to be an employee of the European Commission, but these views and are mine.
And they sometimes kind of get you in hot water. Of course, we're all in hot water, but
well, in the sense that, as I said, the European Commission ceases to exist when ideas cease to bubble up. And one of my favorite bosses, an eminent director general, famously told me, and this is a spirit that runs right through the Commission, he said, it's always better to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. Okay. And so there's a spirit of that runs through the Commission, a courageous will to take initiative, because this is our duty, our obligation, our right, and our honor to be that part of the system that takes the initiative, which is then adopted or not by the Parliament and the Member States. So the right of initiative and the spirit of taking initiative and thinking independently is a very core part of what the European Commission does.
Great. It's not just simply rubber stamping things.
No. As I say, it is a public sector organisation, sound and efficient management, guardian of the treaties, all that good stuff. But it is unique, I think, in the history of all public sector organisations worldwide in having this special remit to sit down, think about stuff, and come up with ideas that might ultimately be translated into legislation or specific actions. And that introduces a natural tension. But that creative tension is good. And as I say, one has to work within certain strictures most of the time, but one is also hugely liberated to think freely. We all walk a line in our work, but the Commission is a particularly good place for people who want to bring the creative and new to apparently intractable problems. The Germans and the French going to war every 50 years for about 300 years. How do you stop that? Yeah. Okay, you set something up where somebody comes up with generally very concrete ideas. How do we nationalize the things they keep fighting over? Nationalize is the wrong word, but how do we make common what they keep fighting over? Coal, steel, land. Okay. If these things were kind of in some way a shared responsibility, maybe they wouldn't fight each other all the time. So so it's both idealistic and very concrete.
Could you used one word before that you and I know has a special meaning, but we need to elaborate on that a moment, or you need to. You used the word foresight. Now it's an ordinary language member of the word in the English language, but it has a special meaning in the context that you used it. Please explain to us what foresight means.
Well, I can tell you what it means to me. My good friend who runs the Foresight Network within the Commission, Nicholas, would probably disagree with me. But for me, it's a question of having people of various expertise and various interests consider problems that are likely to emerge. People often think that foresight is something to do with predicting, I don't know, what color hair robots will have in 50 years, but it's really not that at all. It's a question of providing original and unfettered intellectual insights into how things are unfolding, or could unfold, or will unfold. I mean, we often, currently, because we're doing quite a bit of work thinking obviously around our existing challenges, we often try and remove the notion of future from foresight. So I would almost call it insight. It's okay, what's really happening? We know technically what's happening, and we think we understand that governments have to bail something out, but what's really happening? So that tends to be the thrust of the work. And funnily enough, it's always as much a learning curve for the practitioners as it is kind of an output for policymakers.
Yeah. Now, still, let me get to the kernel of what I didn't hear you say, that
okay.
Foresight is a group. It's a distinct group of individuals who work within the EU Commission, perhaps in addition to some who are outside of it, but you gather together well, nowadays you don't gather together so easily, but you work together, you think together, you communicate as a group.
Correct, and there are several. In fact, this new commission has decided to mainstream foresight into all policy making at all levels, which is really interesting. Foresight has tended to be so there will be foresight activities across all the services. So whether it's dealing with research or agriculture or fisheries or strategies for transport, all of our commission services contain a foresight element, and those foresight groups can work quite independently on foresight for the specific area, but then they always.
All right, I'm going to pause it there. I think we get a good feel for the flavor of that. It sounds like fascinating stuff.
I can give a little heads up if
Please.
it's well worth watching if you want to carry on today or for other people. One of the things he says is that this particular virus is, if we get through this, there's another one right around the corner if they don't even maybe come at us one on top of the other. So that's an important point that he makes. There's no guarantee that there will necessarily be a vaccine for this virus nor the next virus. And that, he basically says, be ready for not returning to business as usual insofar as being able to return to the pubs, to being able to return to big concerts, sporting events. He's saying, as far as he's concerned, he's very pessimistic.
He also states that it talks about it as well, because it's part 1 of 2, and there's 2 15-minute parts to that, so it is worth watching it later on. Maybe it's probably a bit too long for this particular what we're doing here, but he does go into the air travel and everything else and the flights, and he does say like that, international travel, flights and everything, it's all going to come to, it's all naturally going to become a thing of the past because of the increasing Dos Equis. We are already experiencing Dos Equis 2, but there is no, he said there is no cure in the future that they can foresee at the moment. And even if they did manage it, the one that will come around straight after it, even if we prepared now for this one and we did stock up the whole world on ventilators, he said, the next one could attack our kidneys or our liver, and then we're all looking for dialysis machines. So he said, you know what I mean? It's a situation that is going to change the norm.
Yeah, totally. And if you think about the basis of our economy, I'm going to put 2 bookend extremes. And by the way, for those who've just joined, we use Dos Equis as a code word for another Mexican beer, which is also the name of a virus, which is being talked about quite a bit lately, because we've been censored before for using the actual name instead of the Dos Equis code word. That's why we use Dos Equis. But anyway, look at the 2 bookends as the basis for an economy. The simplest basis for an economy is food. Right? Food production and distribution. How do we eat? Right? The other bookend is what we had leading right up to Dos Equis, which was essentially the basis for the global economy being growth and hoarding. Growth for the sake of growth, to generate more money so that more sociopaths could hoard more billions. When this hyper accelerating, locomotive of the global economy stops, right? Miles, who's worked in the railroad sector, can tell you starting up a locomotive is not like switching a bedroom light switch, right? There's a substantial lead time and startup processes and all that. Well, I don't see how we're going to restart this global economy after it's been stopped, right? Beyond pandemics and fears and all that, there's just all this machinery that's been built up over the decades and centuries. That's growth on top of growth on top of growth on top of growth. And so much of the economy is frivolous stuff that we don't need, right? And now in a world where people are much more at home, much more insular, there's far less demand for those sort of luxury items that fall within the realm of conspicuous consumption. Buying a luxury car for $150,000, not because you need it, you've already got 5 cars in the mega garage, but because you want to show off that you've got the latest, shiniest toy. If people aren't going out socializing, you've got no one to show off your toy to, other than, I don't know who, the neighbors, right? So I'm just saying the basis for this hyper accelerated economy is just gone, right? And so,
I'll just interject.
Yeah.
Something that is actually going to change is what was previously something people would say, oh, look at my Ferrari. Oh, look at my big boat or my yacht. That'll now be like the person wearing fur. People will be like, in this situation, that was yesterday. We used to, get all excited about your red Ferrari, but now that actually has the absolute opposite effect. We're actually starting to be repulsed by the sight of a yacht or a red Ferrari.
yeah, exactly. So we're at this beautiful historical moment of this prolonged pause, which I'm sure when historians look back on it, will look much more like a blip than a prolonged pause, a blip of several months or whatever. But with this pause, we have time to think and talk with each other, right? It's like we were all playing some frantic game of musical chairs or something, and everyone's just so frantically in the game that we lose sight of other things. And then suddenly the music stops, the master of ceremony says, okay, that's the end of that game. Let's all take a pause. Let's all form a big circle. Everyone gets a chair. Now let's talk about it. Who are we? How did we get here? Where are we going? What does it all mean? What do we want? What do we really, truly want? And what is right beyond what we want? Right? So we're all in this massive pause, and we now have the luxury of addressing these fundamental questions while we still have time, while we still have food in the pantry, electricity running, internet, right? So for me, this is just such a golden opportunity. Perhaps a very limited window of opportunity. We don't know how long we have that we can even do this, engage with each other, and talk about co-creating a new reality. What a luxury, right? That we can all sit here in comfortable chairs and sofas and teleport to the cloud and talk with each other face to face, people all around the world. And that brings us to the other big theme and topic of the day that we're covering here on the Block Party, which is collective intelligence itself. How do we do it? How do we accelerate it? How do we make it right? Right? How do we do it right? Having done so many things wrong over the last several thousand years. Because as I see it, we have the potential to be like a really smart, well-integrated ant colony, where we're all working together toward agreed upon objectives and aims that really map to these fundamental questions. Who are we? Why are we here? How did we get here? Where are we going? Anyway, with those hopefully enlightened ramblings, I see some comments here. Dot writes, but the solution wouldn't be to stop traveling, right? But going to the root of the problem, animal agriculture and capitalism. I would certainly agree. Emery writes, millions and millions of people listen to Alex Jones. Does anyone know what his perspective on this dire situation is? I'd be interested in knowing. James has posted another link and to a video, and Dot writes, Emery, he's going around with the people protesting social distancing along with advertising cures on his website, like some toothpaste he has.
Who's that?
Alex Jones, who's, basically, got some kind of podcast or something. I've seen him a couple times.
And then in the New York Times today, it says 1 of every 5 New York City residents tested positive for antibodies to the virus, according to preliminary results described by Governor Cuomo on Thursday that suggested the virus had spread far more widely than known. And they're suggesting that because people are building an immunity to it, that they're looking at possibly opening businesses back up.
So, one in 5. What's interesting there is, eventually won't all of us have either get it and die from it or get it and get immunity to it? I think that's the...
Yeah.
That is, the projections are 70% of us will be affected by it, and those out of that 70%, there's 80% will have mild symptoms, 14% will have problems, and 5%, then 4 to 5% will be critical or
Right.
passive.
Yeah.
They're saying that a lot of people think they were already infected back in January and just didn't know it.
Yeah.
Well, according to your beautiful president, anyway, he reckons if you shove a luminous bulb up your backside and inject yourself with disinfectant yesterday, he reckons that'll cure you. And that's the truth. He literally gave a news and suggested to his medical professionals sitting alongside him with their mouths open. He was suggesting, ultraviolet light being put up inside the body and inject people with massive doses of disinfectant. Like, come on, like. I have to even respond to that one, and as well, I just literally said #what the fuck America. Like,
I think the headline was President Trump busts out.
Oh my God.
Anyway, so all that pulp fiction aside, it's kind of I agree with you how absurd, James. But if 20% have the antibodies now, currently, then the crows are certainly whipping up a storm. Are the seagulls out there or something? No, everything's good. Okay. Anyway, so the if 20% have antibodies now, And the projection is it's going to get to 70% of the population affected.
That's right.
We're at less than one-third penetration. So if we go back to business as usual, I think we can go from 20% impacted up to 70 fairly quickly, right? If humans are out there mixing it up with other humans, right? If we stop the quarantine, and I mean, it's like until and unless we let this process of quarantine and collective intelligence play out, so that we can collectively figure out how to recreate our lives here on Earth, right? For example, with a much smaller economy beyond the food economy, which really needs to evolve. But beyond that, do we need to be cranking out so many billions of automobiles and cell phones and,
No, we don't.
millions of airplanes and whatnot? So, it's like, but I see a tendency here that instead of letting this, as Dot wrote earlier, chrysalis phase of the caterpillar to butterfly transformation, if we don't let this process play out and we just go back to business as usual, I think it's going to be a disaster, and the biggest disaster will be this missed opportunity of reconfiguring ourselves.
Yeah, and also the story we've been telling ourselves is that we're always having to do better than we used to. So we'll invent a bicycle, and then we have to keep remaking that bicycle when the original bicycle worked well enough. So we make it lighter framed and fancier and multiple colors and fancier brakes and 20 gears instead of 3 gears, when actually all we really needed were 3 gears. And so there's always this tendency to continually produce and design and create. And I'm wondering, how do we get off that tangent, off that track, and to a place of creativity, but that's done differently, where the creativity is focused on healing the planet and being caretakers of the planet. So how would that creativity look like? And if you think of First Nations people, certainly the Northwest coastal tribes that I'm familiar with and have lived with, their art, for example, their traditions are very much connected with a holistic and spiritual belief system and way of living with Mother Earth. So the art is about the reverence they hold for other species and their connection to Mother Earth and nature. Their way of living is very much in harmony with the seasons. So they're not always having to produce and to do something that's a better hat, where you start weaving it out of plastic. They use cedar bark. It's always worked, and it continues to work. And it doesn't hurt the planet. So how do we get to a different way of thinking and a different way of living on the planet that's off the production line, where we stop consuming, stop destroying? And I think going local is a really good step in that direction. And I think that these restrictions that are placed on us now are undoing what we have been doing. And I see that as a positive thing, even though it creates hardship in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. If you continue, if you have a look at that John Doyle talk with Stuart Scott thereafter, you'll see he goes on to talk about that is what's going to happen. Naturally, everything is going to become localized again, including farming and everything else.
Yeah, and we need massive re-education. So for many people who are urban dwellers, excuse me, they don't know how to plant. We became so store dependent. So we all need to be taught permaculture. We need to be taught how to grow our own food. Like, I tried planting last year vegetables from seeds, and we live in a very cool and damp, wet, not a lot of sun climate here, and they didn't make it, and so if I was dependent on that crop, then I'd be in trouble. So I went to the store. So how do how do we educate people and give them access to starter plants, for example, or seeds, and how do we create this local, do DIY, do it yourself, grow your own food, or community gardens and kitchens? How do we get that off the ground? And that seems to, and how do we educate people? I mean, or rather, we need to re-educate people, starting with children. So we already are training them in this new way of thinking and being, and respecting the earth.
All righty, beautiful. And Miles has had his hand up for a bit. Go for it, Miles.
Yeah, well, to answer Melissa, that's where I'm on this journey of exploring how we might change our governance to incorporate the indigenous wisdom. Because it wasn't but 500 years ago that they lived here on what's often referred to as Turtle Island, but not by all the indigenous people. Nevertheless, let's call it Turtle Island. But they lived here without money, and they lived in balance and with respect for all the relations, as they always are emphasizing. We came over here as insofar as we and our ancestors, we didn't come over here with that attitude of being connected to all our relations, the animals. And that's where I'm trying to, I've got a lot of materials that I'm trying to put together to express my desire that we now recognize their wisdom in our governance. If somehow this would be another level of governance in Canada. That means though that people will have to say, oh, gee, yeah, our worldview is a little amiss, and maybe we do have something to learn from First Nations. It's going to take an open heart. One of the things I really liked in Planet of the Humans was when the social psychologist Sheldon Solomon of Skidmore College, somewhere down in the United States, spoke. And he said, every culture, worldview, or scheme of things offers basically these four things. So our paradigms, one, offer an account of the origin of the universe. Secondly, our culture offers prescriptions on how to behave. 3, it offers its denizens, that's us, a hope of immortality, either literally or symbolically. He says, though, that what the question is, what happens when you bump into people who don't share your beliefs? Because that undermines your confidence and your own worldviews. So this is where we're in the difficult situation of having to undermine our own personal worldviews and then try to communicate that other people need to have their worldviews undermined. So as you were saying, Jamin, this perpetual growth concept we have to say this doesn't work on a finite planet. And I get YouTube sends me these LinkedIn ads for some reason, and it's something about LinkedIn learning or something. And in this short 30-second advertisement for LinkedIn, this person uses growth twice. Tune in to LinkedIn learning because, growth and then growth. So, this growth concept is something we have to really change. Now, I'd like to just go back to that John Doyle, the Irish gentleman who's now with the European Union Commission of the Foresight Group. With respect to this virus, what he was saying is that this is not the end of viruses. And the other thing about this virus is it's not your normal flu bug. Because of its infectious rate, there's different measures. Dr. Nake could maybe talk some more about this, but the transmissibility of this virus is more than usual, the usual flu bug. The consequences are also more than the usual flu bug. It, particularly with anybody with any existing tendency to inflammation or other respiratory issues, it really takes its toll on them. Now, the Washington Post also, hi, Rebecca, the Washington Post also is reporting of a blood consequence of this virus, that it causes people to very quickly have their oxygen levels drop because it thickens the blood. Now, the reason why we need to get serious about changing our diet and distancing ourselves from animals, becoming the animal caretaker species and becoming the climate thermostat species, and let the animals live their lives over there. We stay and eat our healthy fruits, nuts, seeds, vegetables over here. We get separated because, take for example, the bat, which this is believed to have come from. There's a very interesting 20-minute video from 60 Minutes Australia that describes a boy who was 8 years old gets scratched by one of these bats. Now, he doesn't get this current Dos Equis situation. He's not infected with Dos Equis, but he gets a form of rabies from this creature. The thing is, it doesn't manifest for 2 months. And when they know that this particular rabies virus from this bat is in the person, it's a death sentence. There's nothing, zero that they can do. If you do get scratched by a bat or a bit, you must immediately go get rabies shots. So anyway, why am I saying this? Well, this is another type of virus. And it's conceivable, my understanding, is that the next pandemic could be something as horrible as what this little boy dies from, a rabies kind of virus. So, yeah, this is an opportunity to wake up and change fundamentally what we're eating and reestablish the forests for the animals and for our climate.
Yep. Absolutely. And more broadly, an opportunity for us to redesign how we walk the earth. What are we here for? What's our mission? Here we are, this incredibly powerful species. We've got so much power. There's so much that we can do, so much that we can transform, so much that we can make happen. And we're a tool-using species. We flew to the moon, hung out for a while, and came back. That's just an example of our tool-using prowess. And we did that over 50 years ago, right? With technologies older than half a century old, right? So it's just such a beautiful moment. You know, the way I'm personally experiencing it is, you know, when you're in a hamster wheel and you're just spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning, and you're running around so that you don't fall on your head, you know, just to keep up with the wheel. That's kind of how life for me used to be. I used to be a lot more, you know, I don't know, frantic, I guess, just trying to do so many different things and go to so many different things, whether meetings or social events or whatever. And so I have this experience of, you know, being in some sort of like forced event of musical chairs that I didn't want to participate in, but that I got pulled into, sucked into, suckered into, whatever, or was just too cowardly to say no to. And so I got into it, most of us got into it, and we're just spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. So now when it stops, it's kind of like when you stop spinning around as a kid, when someone's twirling you around, when you finally stop, you're still spinning, right? And you might fall over on the floor or something, right? You all know what I'm talking about. I kind of feel like that's where humanity is at now. We've been forced to stop spinning. And now it's like we're just kind of getting used to the fact that we're not spinning anymore. And it's like, when are we going to get back to spinning? Right? That's kind of like the first, automatic response. Why did the spinning stop? Can we get back to spinning? Can we get back to business as usual? As opposed to, what game do we want to play next? I don't know if that makes any sense to anyone other than me. Not even sure it makes sense to me. But if we are going to stop spinning and play a new game, for me anyway, there's two axes that are just critical to this. One is collective intelligence and the other is food. Food so that we can stay alive and actually be intelligent, and then collective intelligence for how do we organize and harness this tremendous potential of collective intelligence that we still haven't really tapped into. In a proper way, I should say. There's all kinds of manifestations of collective intelligence all over the place, very notably in the private sector, right? They're the ones who are out there getting things done. But it's as much collective stupidity as it is collective intelligence, because it's building off of and extending and playing fundamentally the old game of hoarding and accumulation. And as long as you're bought into that game, it looks great. Hey, I'm hoarding more, I'm accumulating more. That's good, right? Right. But apparently not. Obviously not. Right? That's really the source, the root of our problems, is the game we've been playing, the game of hoarding. It's
well, yeah, and when it comes to what you described as socialism, for some reason, some people get uptight about socialism, yet your police, your fire, your roads are all socialized government-run corporations or government-owned corporations. The U.S. Post Office is government-owned. Now, I'm in Canada, and we are similarly social in those areas, socialized. But we also fortunately had a gentleman back in the 40s, I believe, who managed to bring us universal health care. So what we call single payer, single tier health care. And the consequence, there could be other variants as to why this is the situation, but the statistics I've seen shows Canada has a infection rate or death rate, here's the death rate, per 1 million people that is 1/3 of the United States. So on a per capita, per million basis, Canada is 1/3 of your rate. And again, we have single payer, single tier hospital care. What that means is if I need to go to a hospital, I call for an ambulance, I will have to pay for my ambulance. That's not covered unless you have a company that's giving you some subsidy. But when you get to the hospital, the only piece of paper I would sign is an authorization saying you can do what you figure you need to do to me. And that's it. When I'm done, they just say, get your shoes and clothes and don't forget anything. And thanks for visiting, kind of thing. And that's it. There's no paperwork, because we don't have all these insurance companies with their CEOs making tens of millions of dollars and a whole bunch of paper being pushed around needlessly. It's paid for by taxes, and the government basically runs the show. Just like the U.S. Post Office runs your mail, and your police and fire run themselves too. So anyway, that's maybe one thing that perhaps the United States will get, because you're the only nation apparently of any of the industrialized nations that doesn't have single payer, well, or at least have some form of public health care to cover everybody.
Yeah. And these socialized services, for the most part, work, right? Mail gets delivered, people get treated up in Canada, et cetera, et cetera. Fires get put out. So essentially, one way to look at a possible new reconfiguration of society is where we socialize food production and distribution. That's one way that occurs to me that's a quite natural way of handling that sector, which is so vital to everyone. And I haven't yet thought of a different way that we could do it that would work. Again, the money-based system only works if pretty much everyone is working. But when the global economy has contracted as severely as it has and continues to, the people at the bottom of the pyramid, the poorest 50%, how are they going to make money to buy food if we're still relying on a money-based system? I think it makes far more sense to socialize all that. But socialization or socialism with a whole new modern paradigm based on collective superintelligence versus based on something less intelligent than that, right?
You know, one of the things I'd like to just pitch in here on this thought. So I described here in Canada, most provinces have single payer, single tier healthcare. So what that means is it doesn't matter if you are a millionaire or you're just a person who's a grocery clerk. You go to the hospital, you're treated the same. If you have employer benefits, there are opportunities for people to get, more of a private room. But generally speaking, you don't get much more. So whether you're a hockey player making $1 million a year, or just, as I said, a grocery clerk, it's single payer, single tier, which I, think we need to really defend, because there are countries where it's like, okay, there's this standard, people who are on the public healthcare system, they get this level of service, and there's a better level of service for other people. I don't like that. That's why, nobody's life is more important than the other. Anyway, but when it comes to food, you could actually say, well, all we want to do is provide fruits, vegetables, and nuts as this socialized program. We're not talking about filet mignon and Kobe steak or anything like that. No, well, it's just going to be fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. People might say, oh, okay, well, that's all right then, But what they don't know is those people are actually going to be the happier, healthier ones, because of the healthy diet that simple food is.
Yeah. No, I love the idea. I would add grains to the mix there, but basically just the fundamental basic plant foods for sustaining life. And just imagine that we did socialize that. Everyone gets these foods delivered to their door in a very organized, sanitary, really well designed and implemented system. If we did that, people wouldn't need to leave their homes for the most part. The vast majority of trips away from home today are people going out to get food, including people going out to work to make money, to buy food at stores and bring it home. So with food delivery, we eliminate the majority of people's needs to leave home. And then we can stay at home and really give the opportunity for the chrysalis phase, if I'm pronouncing it right, to progress in us making the transition from caterpillar to butterfly.
Oh, and I'll say that, what you're talking about is actually the way the First Nations, the indigenous people lived. Theirs was a sharing economy, and people were fully actualized right from the beginning. The Abraham Maslow and his hierarchies of needs pyramid that we live under, in other words, food, shelter, a place to, a bed to sleep in, and health care and nutritious food. Those are your physiological needs. They're at the bottom of the Maslow's pyramid. And then, if you have those attended to, you may have spare time to read Plato and Aristotle and think about these higher things, right? But if you are still just focused on how do I feed myself and find shelter, you're not going to be fully actualized. If indigenous people lived fully actualized from the day they were born, because it was a community that said, you don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from. We're going to make sure you have it. And so there you can actually sit under the stars and look up there and think about, the issues of creation and where did I come from, and these philosophical questions, because you don't have to worry about where your meal is coming from. The community provides it. We destroyed that. We trampled over all that when we came over from mainly European countries with this hoarding and growth and profit from somebody else, and create scarcity of food so that I can somehow, have an upper hand over you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Plenty of examples of indigenous cultures that lived in balance, and we've gotten so far out of balance. It's just ridiculous. I mean, analogies have been made that we are a cancer. We are the locusts of the earth. And like locusts, they come in, they have hyper growth in their population, they decimate everything. And when they've eaten everything and there's nothing else to eat, then they say, okay, great, our job is done, and then they die. But they've left scorched earth in their wake. That will be our legacy if we do not radically transform. We will go down as a flash in the pan locust species that came, hyper grew, way overpopulated, killed everything in its wake, and then finally died of starvation or exposure or pandemics or combinations of these, if we do not radically transform. So to sum it up, I believe our biggest opportunity right now is to co-evolve in tight formation, collective intelligence and redesigning our food network. And, you know, socializing food, basically. Because if we can do that successfully, we stay alive. And for the most part, we can stay home, meaning we can let the chrysalis phase go its evolutionary path and really amp up our collective superintelligence through this vast network of conversations that's growing and forming and becoming ever more organized every day. And that's a big topic I want to talk about later today. After the segment on the Divine Feminine, which starts in 19 minutes, that'll go for 2 hours with Will Tuttle, led by Melissa and Jackie and Myra. And then after that 2-hour segment, we will jump full bore into eradicating hunger and eradicating pandemics through whole food, plant-based diet and reconfiguring our food system, our food networks, to take that all the way to the delivery phase. All right, looks like Nolan is joining, and I'm sure we'll be joined by Jackie and Myra shortly. Nolan, welcome. How you doing there, Nolan?
Hey, I'm doing well. I've been listening for the past hour and a half or so, just watching over Twitch while I got some breakfast and got set up out here.
Awesome. Awesome. Hey, I got your text. Thanks so much for being on call last night. I'm sorry that you had to, get disturbed by text messages and whatnot.
Oh, it's okay.
Middle of the night. Anyway, everything just went without a hitch on Twitch. So anyway, welcome. Great to see you. In 18 minutes, we'll start the Divine Feminine. I'd like to take about a 15-minute break. We can either keep recording or not record during that period as people wish. And then we'll start the Divine Feminine. And will that be here?
I'll take a break too, so we'll catch you in 15.
Okay, great. Thanks, Miles. And to answer Rebecca's question, yes, that will be here. Don't go away. Don't change the channel, as they used to say.
Well, if you turn it off, how will I get back on?
No, if you turn it off, you get back on the same way that you got on, an hour ago. Just click on the same link.
Okay. Thank you.
No, I was just talking about turning off recording, pausing recording.
Oh, right. But we'll still be here, Rebecca.
Yeah, we'll still be
okay.
here.
And we're not
Yeah,
shutting
it still
down.
runs. Just
Thank you
some
so
people
much.
can
Room
chat.
open. We're keeping the room open. But while Jamin's taking his 15 minutes and before you pop off, Miles, one of the things I just wanted to ask all of you who are present is one of the things I'm noticing now that we've all switched over to like Zoom and all these online rooms and ways of communicating is that it seems like the majority of people that I do business with in the art realm are still doing business as usual. They just switched the platform. So instead of the in-person, it's now online business as usual. And I find that really disappointing, frankly,
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to just ask a question. What is it going to take to shift us collectively into this new modality of thinking, of sharing, of really sharing the wealth equally, of gifting instead of always this kind of hoarding and profitability thing? And also what I'm personally really tired of is this favoritism thing that happens so much in our society, where there's a few who are favored and the majority of people are underdogs. So how do we get beyond that now? How do we see everyone as a gift and everyone is bringing something valuable to the table? And how do we make sure that everyone is honored and treated equitably?
Beautiful. All right, I'm going to pause recording